Hello friends, welcome back to another video. I am finally recovering from a bout of COVID, so I thought I would do a sit down video today talking you through 3 of my favourite art books of all time. I've gone through each of these 3 books and picked out 3 tips and pieces of advice that will hopefully help you all become better artists. First book is by Richard Schmidt, who is a master of oil painting and alla prima technique. He sadly passed away almost exactly a year ago from when I'm recording this video, and I'm sad that I didn't know about him more when he was still alive, but I'm so happy that I have found his work and his books now. It was really difficult to condense this whole book down into just 3 key points, but these are the 3 that I find myself remembering long after I finish reading the book. The first one is about what Richard Schmidt calls licking the painting, and this is basically brushing over the same area over and over as you decide what to do next. This is the equivalent of daydreaming, a substitute for thinking. I have watched many painters do this unconsciously. If you have painted in a group, you too have probably noticed a person with a dazed expression locked into working on one small area of his or her painting, making the same brush mark over and over and over. If you are ever like that person, and we all have been, break the spell. The next piece of advice is around squinting for values and not colour. You've probably heard about the advice to squint to help you see a scene more simply, but Richard Schmidt goes into a lot more detail about squinting. He's got a whole couple of pages just about squinting. He explains that you should only use squinting for figuring out your values, so the light and the dark parts of your paintings, and never to judge the colours, because squinting almost distorts the colours, because when you squint, your eyelashes are covering a lot of your eye, so it actually makes everything a bit darker. So the point of squinting is to help you see the relationships between the values and to simplify everything down to basic shapes. And finally, this is a bit of a mind-bending tip, but basically cool light creates warm shadows and warm light creates cool shadows. This kind of blew my mind when I first heard it, but it actually makes quite a lot of sense when you think about it. He illustrates this in the book with this image. This is warm light and a cool shadow, and cool light with a warmer shadow, and he gives the advice of using a white piece of paper and a white object if you're out and about. So obviously it can be tricky, because there are some situations where it's not extremely warm or extremely cool light, but it's just an interesting thing to start to think about, and has definitely been helpful for me when I'm sketching, especially when I'm sketching outside. So the next book is Colour and Light, a guide for the realist painter by James Gurney. A lot of you probably know James Gurney. He has a YouTube channel and a daily blog, and he's also the author of Dinotopia. This book is really great for a deep understanding of colour and light, and all the different types of colour and all the different types of light, and how light affects colour, and it's almost like a scientific look into colour and light and how that affects your art. So the first tip from this book is about handling greens. It can be quite easy for greens to look a bit garish and fake, especially if you're using green paint straight from the tube. So James suggests toning the canvas with pinks and reds, which can sort of pop through the painting every now and again and kind of get rid of the monotony of the green a little bit. So I've definitely been trying this out as I've been doing a bit more acrylic and oil painting recently. Another thing that James suggests, and something that I've been doing for quite a while, especially with watercolour, is to try to avoid using greens straight from the tube and instead mixing them from yellows and blues. This tends to make the greens a little bit less saturated, but quite often that's actually what you want. The next tip from this book is about sky holes, which are the little holes of sky that pops through trees when you're painting trees. He says that because the holes are actually filled with lots of little branches, but they're just so far away that you can't see them, that the sky holes should be painted a little bit darker than the actual sky behind it. And my final tip from James Gurney's book is about the colour of reflected light. Now this is a really big topic. He gives this example. So here the blue bits of the building are sort of pointing more upwards, so they're reflecting the sky even though they're in shadow, and then these parts under here are pointing downwards, so they're almost reflecting the light from the ground even though they're still in shadow. The final book is Painting Light and Shadow in Watercolor by William B. Lawrence. I hadn't actually heard of this painter until someone recommended this book to me on Instagram. The first tip is something that I think about all the time when I'm painting, and that is that light can dramatically change the value to the point where a white wall can be darker than a black roof. So William B. Lawrence gives the example of a white house with a black roof, and he paints two different versions of it. One where the black roof is actually darker than the white wall, and then one which is actually more correct, where the black roof becomes lighter than the white wall in shadow. So basically this is just a good reminder to not assume the values and not take what you know too literally. So if you know that the roof is black and the wall is white, don't assume that that the black roof is actually going to be darker. Another tip in this book which was quite helpful was that as long as your values are correct, you can pretty much just change the colour to whatever you want and it will still make sense. While it's important to make sure that your values are correct, you can have a lot more fun with colour within those values as long as the colour doesn't alter the value too much. And finally, this is a very helpful tip and something that I think about a lot, and that is to pay attention to the bottom of your shape. So he says, I have observed that many of my students have very interesting edges on the tops of their shapes but boring edges on the bottoms. This is partly due to the flat plane of the earth from which most objects rise up. It is also probably the result of Mother Nature placing our heads on top. If you walked on your hands for a day, you would be much more aware of the interesting edges that occur on the bottoms of shapes. So he suggests that you occasionally turn your painting upside down and treat the bottoms as the tops. So there are 9 tips for you from these 3 books. These are things that have been ingrained into my brain now, and I always think about them when I'm painting. I have a lot of art books, so let me know if you want me to make some more videos like this. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.